always I'm going to highlight my cognitive verb or write it in there. So we are going to be analysing, and I know that my essay is going to be about superstition and the role that it plays. So in order for me to understand this question, I feel like I just need to do a little bit more unpacking of the words. So when I think of the word role, I'm going to think of like a job or maybe a purpose. When I think of superstitious, I think of this as a belief. It's also very supernatural. Now, when I'm thinking how a role is played, so I always think about like the part, or again, the purpose. So therefore, I know that the question I'm going to be answering is, what is the job or purpose of superstition, as in like the belief in the supernatural, in burial rites? So for me, when I think of a question like this, when I'm wanting to start to do my brainstorm, I gravitate towards the characters, because if I'm thinking about the role, I'm thinking about it in terms of the role it plays in perhaps their lives or perhaps their fate or something like that. So that's where I start gravitating towards. So I know that once I've broken down the question, my next favorite thing to do is to do a bit of a brain dump. So get all of my ideas out there so that I can feel nice and confident and know that I have lots of things that I could talk about. So like I said, I'm wanting to break this one down into characters. So I'm just going to start to list all the characters that I think I could talk about. And Toti. Now obviously there are more characters and I might think of things that pertain to more of the characters as I go on with my brainstorm, but just for now I'm thinking of these 4. Now what I want to think about is what about them made me think of superstition. So for example, Nathan was the first character that came to mind. Why? Well, for me, I think of how paranoid he was, and I guess a lot of the discourse from the novel about superstitions came from Nathan. We know he had dreams that made him quite superstitious. Now we also know that Agnes had dreams. Now, when I think about what these dreams were, for Nathan, we know that that's where he got his name. Because his mum had the dream that that's what she should name him. And we know that Agnes had a dream about Toti. So I'm going to list that there. We know that Nathan was also very superstitious, and that led to his paranoia. So I'm thinking about the death waves and how those made him think of death. Obviously. That's really important because I am able to link this to another concept, which already I can see some ideas starting to come alive here. Now I'm also able to link this into a cultural assumption because we have some religious beliefs going on here. Now these death waves are foreshadowing. Now I've written dreams in pink because it is an aesthetic feature / stylistic device of symbolism, because they symbolize so many different things in the text and they're really important. Now a big one with Agnes and with all characters in the text are the ravens, which are also a symbol. Now we know that ravens are referred to as being a bad omen. So that's definitely something that I want to write down, and they also link to death. I've just remembered something about Nathan, and that is that it is said that superstitious signs troubled him. So I want to write that down. Now this is from Agnes's perspective, so we could talk about narrative viewpoint. Writing that has also made me remember this one part where Nathan talks about wanting to show the truth of superstition, because it's clearly something he believed in quite a lot. So I'm going to write that in here. Now instantly this really shows us Nathan's values and his beliefs, because he really believes in superstition but also values it. So I'm just going to write the word values because I know I'm writing about superstition. Now, as I move on to Agnes, I've already mentioned the ravens, and I'm going to expand on that a little bit in a moment. But I think about the fact that Agnes is really superstitious in a way that has an impact on her sense of self. So I think about when she helped to deliver the baby, like Rosa's baby, and she refuses to touch the baby because she thinks that she has this kind of curse, perhaps.
So as I'm editing, I've just realised that a section of me brainstorming did not record. So I did add in the idea that Agnes talks about being friends with the ravens, sorry, when she talks about how lonely she is. And then that kind of made me think about fate a little bit because, as you can see, I added in like Agnes's sense of self. It's almost like she believes that she's responsible for her own fate, which reminds me of the quote, "Did I author my own fate?" So I've added those in there. Yeah, sorry, I don't know why I didn't record. Okay, back to the high quality video.
Agnes and death, which also reminds me of the quote about everyone I love. That one? You know the one. I know you know the one. So I'm listing that down there as well. Now we also, with Agnes, have this other symbol of the stone. So there's lots of talk about how her mum put the stone in her mouth, and then when she goes to be executed, she mentions the stone. She says she was left with nothing but a stone. So I'm going to mention that here because she obviously thinks that there is some kind of superstition with the stone. So when she says they might see the lamb circled by ravens, and you know I love an animalistic metaphor, so I'm going to bring that in there. But then also, now I've already kind of mentioned religion, but one thing I find really interesting is that these superstitious beliefs very much contradict the religious beliefs of Iceland, so I want to make a note of that. Now, when I think about Margaret, there's one particular time when I think about her being superstitious, and it's when she first sees Agnes and she talks about there being, now Margaret talks about there being marks of evil, or she looks for marks of evil on Agnes, which is really important because it highlights to us that Margaret does have these beliefs. Now, as I'm starting to look at my brain dump, I want to be able to, as we know, make some connections. So draw some big ideas out of this. So I want to look for similarities or differences or anything like that. Instantly, I can see that I have the most for Natan and the most for Agnes. Now, I can see that I've found connections with some concepts. So we have death, and we have death, and then we have fate. Now, with Natan, there's lots of paranoia. So like this here, even this, and we could argue that this paranoia is perhaps what leads to his demise. So we could talk about that. So I might just make a note of that here. Obviously, we know that Agnes is convicted for murder, right? But she didn't really believe she ever stood a chance. And perhaps we could argue that that leads to her fate. Perhaps it's not the only causation, but it definitely does have some kind of impact. So I'm starting to look at all of this together and think about the fact that superstition is so often a catalyst for death, particularly when linked to fate. So if I'm wanting to put that into a thesis statement, what I'm starting to think is so that could be my first thesis statement. Alternatively, what I could say is then I could talk about fate and death within there.
So as you can see, I have two thesis statements that I think I could work with based on my brainstorm. But hopefully this helped some of us come up with some ideas with superstition, or even just have a better understanding of how it works as a concept. I think it would be a good one to link into other concepts, is my advice, if there were to be a superstition question, or even just how it impacts characters' identities and motivates them. Perhaps you could even have a thesis statement that looks at how, when superstition, or like when motivation is provided as a result of superstition or fueled by superstition, that's when things go pear-shaped, or maybe something a little more academic than that. I hope that this helps, and let me know if you need anything. Bye!